harmony. On April 15th, 1775, the shot was fired at Lexington and Concord, and it was known as the shot heard round the world. Well, that phrase meant that every king and potentate knew that if the Americans won their war for independence, their elitist game was up. So on May 1st, 1776, Adam Weishaupt began the Illuminati officially. Now, the term Illuminati should ring bells to you some way, because always the conspiracy has these terms, and similar to that. This Illuminati has gone forward, and this is what we'll describe now some. The goal was to infiltrate America to destroy Christianity, to create a dependence upon government, and not have faith in God. One of the first bills that the first Congress passed was the Northwest Ordinance. Article 3 of the Northwest Ordinance was to the standards by which other states would come into the Union. The Northwest Ordinance in Article 3 says, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary for the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Now that's really important. The first word there is religion, morality, and knowledge. Up until about 1875, those words were used in the constitutions of every new state that came into the Union. I think Kansas was about the last. Our Christian culture has been switched. Now, instead of the natural man being an enemy to God, it is that man is born good. He does not need the Ten Commandments, and man does not need the atonement or rules, except from government when he goes astray. Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1948, and Friedrich Nietzsche in Germany declared, God is dead. These atheistic creeds were expounded upon and pushed among our intellectuals. The great shift was from the intellectuals of our early days and what they taught in the universities and how that carried on to about 1870s, but it takes a while for it to penetrate. A great motivation among the elitists was sexual freedom. They did not want accountability to God for their actions. Immorality is a big tool today in order to be advanced in some occupations and accepted in the very inner circles of the elitist power. Consider the number of murders that are associated with the Clintons and how they have been protected in spite of the evidence. A few of those were Vince Foster, James McDougal, Ron Brown. There are about 20 murders connected with them. And they're not the only ones. The change was also from the creator to the created. To worship Mother Earth, the New Age movement, or the Age of Aquarius, and to worship reason. In fact, in France, there's a statue to Mother Reason. Our culture over time has transitioned from faith in God to faith in entitlements. Entitlements are simply theft, or as Bastiat would say, legalized plunder. In the 1870s is when Harvard and Yale and the rest of the Ivy Leagues converted from schools to train ministers to secular universities, focusing on socialism. This is because some of the greatest science was going on in Germany, and Germany most of their professors were very socialistic, and a whole talk could be given on what the Frankfurt School did when it came here. The shift was from individualism to mass culture, groupthink, be like everyone else. And we are all responsible for the less fortunate by compulsion, rather than individual charity freely given and individual responsibility. So the shift from our once glorious Christian culture to paganism has been orchestrated and pushed by conspiracy and advanced by many intellectuals who are themselves victims of it. Obviously, liberals promote each other into positions. Several years ago, like 35, I asked Frank Meyer, who was a writer for National Review, I asked him, why do so many liberals, why are professors so liberal? And he says, because we think we're smarter than everybody else and we can run your life. Makes sense, doesn't it? Except they can't. In the 20s and 30s, novelists and playwrights centered in New York's Greenwich Village were adherents to socialism, anarchism, and communism. They include most of the writers who constitute the standard canon of American literature for college students. Now, these were all socialists and communists as I read their names. You'll like some of their literature, nevertheless, at least I do. Theodore Dreiser, George Bernard Shaw, Eugene O'Neill, Carl Sandburg, John Dow Passos, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Sherwood Anderson, Sinclair Lewis, Jack London, and Upton Sinclair. The publishing houses, as well as NBC, CBS, and ABC, the wire services, were all run by socialists and communists. Well, in 1940, George Orwell stated the following. It's an amazing quote. For 200 years, we sawed and sawed and sawed at the limb we were sitting on. And in the end, much more suddenly than anyone had foreseen, our efforts were rewarded, and down we came. But unfortunately, there was a little mistake. The thing at the bottom was not a bed of roses, after all. It was a cesspool full of barbed wire. Pretty graphic. Timelines show a progressive pattern because we face a conspiracy. Nothing happens in politics by accident. It is all carefully planned and planned out a long time in advance. So in 1913, what a watershed year. With the Federal Reserve and the income tax and the direct election of senators. Those are things that need to be reversed. In 1922, Margaret Sanger launched Planned Parenthood. Also in 1922, the Council on Foreign Relations was founded. Now that is kind of the head that we say there are gods and there are demigods. The demigods are who you see, the president. The gods are the ones behind them. And that's what the CFR fits in, Council on Foreign Relations. They began in 1922. And the Carnegie Endowment, they were founded, a lot of them were all part of the big foundations with very wealthy people. The Carnegie Endowment took on perverting the universities and our educational system. And those are talks for another time. But we can see the results. In 1945, the U.S. joined the United Nations to keep us out of war. So far, the U.S. has been involved in 50 wars or police actions, spilling the blood of our boys and the boys of other countries. And what follows are a plethora of Supreme Court decisions that were outside the authorization of the Constitution. In '62, the court declared school-sponsored prayers unconstitutional. Segregation was declared unconstitutional. In '65, Ed Sullivan lauded the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Elvis, and the drug culture, and dissident music was well on the way. A succession of hard rock was on the way. Ed Sullivan also promoted Fidel Castro. and declared him the George Washington of the Sierra Maestra. In the 60s, the civil rights movement, funded by the Ford Foundation, has created havoc among our black families. One black lady exclaimed that the Ku Klux Klan could never have done to the black families in terms of destroying families and destroying their Christian base as the civil rights movement had. In 1970, Nixon takes us off the international gold standard, in which this is the beginning of a lot of inflation. In 1973, Roe versus Wade passed. Abortions mushroomed to 300,000 per year, with taxes paying the bill and extra profit from baby body parts. At the same time, our youth have had too much luxury and have boring school curriculums. A natural result is the loss of respect for religion and family traditions. And then in 2012, Obamacare is declared constitutional, which it isn't, and the Supreme Court declares sodomite unions legal.